There is a watercolor palette that has been in my Amazon cart for a very long time. Recently, Paul Rubens reached out to me and asked me whether I wanted to try the updated version of it. And of course, I jumped on that opportunity. Keep in mind that while they did provide me this as a product sample, this is not a sponsored video. And I want to look at this, whether it is suitable for beginners or advanced artists, and overall, if this is a good starter watercolor palette. So here you can already see the amazing packaging. It looks really nice. Personally, I'm a sucker for all of these pretty colors and everything. The pink palette, I specifically asked for that one. You can also get that in a black color with golden accents. I mean, honestly, it doesn't really matter what it looks like, but it's really fun. It also comes with a swatch card, and then we have the colors. And what I really liked is that they're really easy to unwrap. I mean, personally, I don't really need to unwrap them. Like, they could have been unwrapped already if you asked me, but they were really quick and easy to unpack. And then I did a bit of swatching, and I used the swatch sheet that they provided, which is very practical. The only thing that I don't like, or two things rather, the first is that the color names are not on the swatch sheet. It's just the numbers. So I wrote all of the color names on the swatch sheet as well, because I personally need the color names instead of just those numbers. And the other thing is that the swatch sheet for some reason doesn't fit into the palette. It's just the exact same size. Here you can see that I accidentally put some of this purple or violet color into the indigo. So if the indigo is not perfectly accurate, that's my mistake. I tried to fix the mistake as well as I could. And I really do like this indigo color. It's really pretty. I think from what I can remember, the indigo is the color that is the least light fast in the set. Overall, the pigments seem to be nice. I'm not a full-on expert about pigments. I know a little bit about them. From what I've heard, this palette is really good in the choice of the pigments. And also we do have pigment information, which is rather rare for this price range. On Amazon right now, on the German version, this palette costs 45 euros. So I think for this color range, it's a really good price, and they were really nice to work with, honestly. You can see there's a big variety of colors, and the swatch sheet, it's sparkles. I've never seen that before. Here you can see all of the colors that I swatched. I have to admit, I do miss my beloved sap green. They also sent me some paper. This is cold pressed paper, and I just wanted to see if I could easily mix sap green, which is my personal favorite color when it comes to watercolors. It's this warm, slightly desaturated green tone, and when I started mixing the colors, I noticed that they're really easily mixed. So the colors are really bright. I personally don't use colors that are too bright. I usually always desaturate my colors, and that works really well with these. They mix beautifully. I love all of those mixes. I came up with this color scheme here, wanted to just play around with that a little bit because it is mermaid. I wanted to do at least one mermaid painting. It's not the only focus of the piece, or it is the main focal point, but it's gonna be kind of a landscape you're gonna see. And at first I used the paper in this format, in this landscape format, and I started my sketch here, but I soon realized that I did not like the composition like that. The tail, it looked so wrong. I tried to fix it. Still looked kind of broken, it just would not fit. So I decided to cut a piece off of the paper and make it square. I reused the same tape that I had used before, so I wouldn't waste it. You really have to tape down this paper because it doesn't come on a pad. The watercolor pads are usually glued together, or at least the higher end ones are. And I really like that because then it doesn't warp as much. You can see I had a big issue with that arm. I don't know how many times I corrected and changed that. Generally, proportions aren't my strong suit. I've been practicing this a bit off camera, but I don't do people that much. But it's just gonna be a mermaid silhouette, and the other elements of the piece are gonna be important too. So I thought I could do that and would be manageable. So I chose my color palette and I decided it would be a purple green theme for the most part. And I started with a pretty dark color for the mermaid because we see it from the bottom up. And back to the paper, I really like the texture of the paper. It's one of my favorites. It's cold press, but it's not too textured. And it is rather rare for me to find paper where I really like the texture. And also the fact that it sparkles is just such a fun thing. I don't know. I can imagine that making something as a gift for someone or invitations or stuff like that would be really cool with this paper because it has this special sparkliness and it is really subtle. You can't see it very well from this angle, and I like that because it doesn't distract from it. You have to look at it with specific light or from a specific angle. You can see it if you tilt the paper a little bit, and that it just adds an element of surprise and just something else. And I really like that because it's not too overpowering. The only thing that I don't like about the paper is, like I said, it is not glued to a pad. So you have to tape it onto something. Here I taped it directly onto my desk. You could also tape it onto a board underneath the paper, which would be ideal probably, so you can still move it around just so it will stay flat, because otherwise it will warp. Most watercolor papers warp if they're not glued to the surface. So that's more an issue of the way that it is packaged, if that's the right word, and not the paper itself. So if they glued that on a block, this would probably be my new favorite paper. But even the way it is, I still really like it, even though it is separate pieces of paper. And you can see that I started with my mermaid here and I left a little bit around it, so it's not going to be as thin as it is right now. And I really wanted to play around with different colors and see how they work together, because I had a feeling that the colors in this palette would go really well together when mixed. There's certain watercolors that are not really meant to be mixed and they look muddy and not so good if they are mixed. But with this palette, I had a feeling that they would probably do really well with that. And I really can say that it worked really well. I don't think that I had any color mix that I didn't like, so it was a really nice experience. And even though there's no sap green in the color in the palette, which I'm a little bit disappointed by. I mean, I knew that beforehand. Obviously, they put all the color names on there. I don't know if they're available open stock. I'm gonna have to look into that and maybe replace one color with a sap green, or maybe put another brand in there or something, because then this would probably be my perfect watercolor palette. I really think that there's everything in there that you need. There's warm and cool yellow tones, same thing with the red tones and blue tones. There's a big variety for mixing. I also really like this more dirty olive green tone. I used it a lot for my mixes, because if you mix it into your super bright colors, just a little bit of it, then it makes them a little bit more desaturated desaturated, it neutralizes them a little bit, and that makes it look a little bit more organic, and I really like it that way. And I have to say that I would rather have really vibrant colors that I wouldn't use as is, but you can mix the not so vibrant colors really easily, because you can always go from very vibrant colors to desaturated colors, but you can't go the other way around. So if you have a palette that has more neutral colors that are a little bit more desaturated, it's really hard to then go ahead and mix the more vibrant colors, because you can't really go back there. I also just recently tried the Gansai Tambi Kuretake watercolors, the Art Nouveau set, and I'm gonna be posting a video about that as well, which is completely different compared to these, like the complete opposite. So these, I would say, are really nice for beginners. If you don't have any watercolors yet, I think this is a good choice. I think price-wise, they're more in the student range. They're probably comparable to the Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors. They perform similarly from what I can remember from the Winsor & Newton. I have them and I've used them in the past, but not too much so I can completely compare them here. But I would say I had an even better experience with these than with the Winsor & Newton ones, but that could also be due to the fact that now I know what I'm doing with watercolors, and when I was using the Winsor & Newtons more, back then I didn't really know as much. And the last few years, I've been using the White Nights watercolors a lot. I have a set that I really, really love. And I would say that these would not replace the other set because they are very different. These are more the classical watercolors that you would expect. It is really easy to get translucent colors and to wash them down. And when they dry a little bit lighter, just as you would expect with watercolors. You can build up the layers because they're not extremely overly pigmented. They're pigmented and vibrant, so you can mix easily, but if you put them down, you can still build on your colors. Whereas with the White Nights, if you just dip your brush into them ever so slightly, you get an insane amount of vibrancy and pigment out of them. They're just different from any other watercolors that I've ever tried, and I'm sure that there's people out there who can explain exactly what the difference is and whether one of them is better or the other. I just have to say it's a different experience. If you are starting out with watercolors, then I would say the Paul Rubens are a good choice, because if you tend to go overboard with your colors and you don't really know that much yet, then these could be good because you can correct your mistakes more easily, because they're a little bit more on the lighter side compared to the White Nights that are the most intense watercolors that I've used. And I still really love the White Nights. I will still continue to use them. The small set that I have is amazing, and I recently bought another color set that I'm really, really excited about and will also do a video about. But I'm sure that I'm gonna use the Paul Rubens in more videos from now on as well. I don't think that you can do anything wrong with these. When I first unwrapped them, some of the colors looked a little bit crumbly on the palette, and I was a little bit worried that that would tell me something about the texture of the paint, but it was pretty much only an aesthetic thing, because I think they just been through a bit in transit and were probably shaken around a bit, so they were kind of a little bit crumbly, dusty. A little bit of the pigment had come out of the pans, but it really wasn't too bad. That might be the reason why they are wrapping them individually in transport, so that doesn't come out as much. And a lot of brands do that. This is not just their brand. And this is also where I noticed the difference between the White Nights and these, because the White Nights, they have probably a different binder. don't fully, some of the colors don't fully dry in the palette, and they're still a little bit gooey after using. But these are a little bit more on the drier side in the palette. But I haven't noticed any issues with getting enough pigment or color out of them. You don't have to pre-wet them in order to use them. I see a lot of people when they use watercolors, they wet all of the individual pans and wait a little bit before they use them. I think you don't have to do that with them. It might help with getting even more vibrancy and more paint out of them, but you don't have to if you don't want to do that. I find that just working with them just activates them enough, and you can see right now in the palette they're really glossy. All of them are really wet. I'm using quite a lot of water here. Also, the paper handled that really well. I was using a lot of water. I wasn't really layering that much though, so if you're layering even more, then I would say a thicker paper that is glued onto a pad would probably be better. If you have a main focus on watercolors, I know that people really love the Arches watercolor pads because they're really durable and handle a lot of layers. Me personally, I do a bit of mixed media here and there. I'm gonna introduce colored pencils afterwards. And I also use gouache quite a bit, not in this piece, but in general. And I haven't tried the paper with gouache yet, but I imagine it's probably gonna do really well with the gouache. I'm gonna try that, of course. Because it is not extremely textured. It's a pet peeve of mine that I don't really like extremely textured paper, even though it's cold press where you would expect a little bit of texture. I don't want the texture on my hand. I don't want it to be too textured so I can't add details as easily. Yeah, you can also kind of see a little bit the glitteriness of the paper coming through now that I'm putting on more of the paint. And this is just a perk of this paper. If you don't like that, then this is definitely not the paper for you. But if that sounds fun to you, I don't think you can do much wrong with getting that paper and just trying it out. And yeah, that's basically my thoughts on all of this. And if you like green and purple together, then make sure to check out my brand new illustration course where I will teach you how to recreate this magical farm illustration. If you have the problem that your illustrations just don't come out the way that you had imagined them in your head, and your compositions just don't look quite right, and then you get frustrated and then you quit, then this is the course for you, because I will help you with that. I know that it can be overwhelming to try to finish an illustration that has a bunch of detail in it and to stick with it and not get frustrated in the process. But you're definitely not alone with that. Students who have taken this course also felt insecure with this, and I showed them how they can create a finished piece like this step by step, and also how to create your own fantastical illustrations. If you're really quick, you might still be able to catch the early bird offer. I will link the course in the description box down below, so don't forget to check it out. You can see that the piece is coming together now, and I have to say I'm pretty happy with the end result. I am really glad that I switched the format of it, because the landscape format really wasn't working. In the beginning, I wanted to do a portrait format so that the mermaid would be vertical on the piece, but that was too hard to film, in all honesty. I think that portrait formats are always hard for YouTube and the landscape format, and so I don't do them as often as I would like to. And if I do, then they're usually on the smaller scale, because otherwise it's really hard to film them. But I am glad that I tried the square format here because I feel like it works really well, and I like the symmetrical look of it because it is kind of split in the middle and then almost mirrored on both sides. And I also wanted to have some of those lily pads in a pink tone so that the purple of the mermaid would kind of be repeated in the piece and not everything there is green. And I love the color combo of that. And I did a little bit of glazing as well because I felt like these watercolors would be really suitable for that. And I think that it turned out really fun. I want to experiment a bit more with that in the future, so let me know if you're interested in that and if you would like to see similar illustrations like that in the future. And also if you're generally interested in product reviews like this, if you want to see me compare products, you can see that I am currently using Prismacolor colored pencils to add a little bit of detail. I find that you could use any colored pencils on top of watercolors because they just go together really, really nicely. You can add line art, shading, a little bit more of details with the colored pencil because I find that I have a lot of more control over the colored pencils compared to the watercolors, or sometimes I also use gouache with colored pencils, but there you have to be a little bit more careful so that the colored pencils will stick on top of the gouache. But lately I've really been enjoying this sort of mixed media approach. I used the purple on the pink lily pads, and then I used the dark green on the green ones. And I also used a bunch of lighter colors to add even more details and some highlights as well. And I do a lot of that and I show how to do that in my new course, where I really go into detail on how you can create a piece with watercolors and then add more definition with the colored pencils. And I also use a little bit of gouache in the course. You don't really need to have an in-depth knowledge about gouache, and you don't even need that many gouache tubes. I would say that 3 tubes are probably all that I used, a yellow, a magenta, and a white. And I show you how you can fix little mistakes with the gouache and add even more highlights with the gouache. So I really encourage you to try mixed media stuff and just experiment a little bit with all of your products that you already have. And if you don't really have a good beginner set of watercolors, then this could be a good choice. It really depends on what you are looking for and what you want. If you already have starter watercolors, if you, for example, have the Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors, then you might not need this set because it is, in my opinion, really similar. But if you don't have a really good starter set yet, then this could be the one. And I'm currently, I think I'm now done with getting new palettes. Maybe, hopefully. I also bought a bunch just for myself and will hopefully show all of them to you in my videos. If there is, however, something that you've seen popping up everywhere and you're really curious to find out what it's about, then let me know and tempt me into buying more stuff. It might work. I might buy even more. Let's hope not. But yeah, it is finished now. We are removing the tape, and that really shows you what it's like now in the end. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Don't forget to check out my new course, and if you're interested in more watercolor reviews, then check out this video next.